Okay, welcome to our serious Brandy interview with Bertrand Cognac. We are very pleased to have Therese Bertrand and Seph Hall here with us. Therese and Seph, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. We're very excited. This is our cognac date. Hey.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit of background about Bertrand and about yourselves and how you became involved in the cognac industry.
Okay. Of course. So Seph is American and I am the French. My family dates back from the 1730s, 100s. That's as far back as we've been able to trace, although we think we've existed before. We've always been sort of in the vines production and cognac production, and we arrived in 2009.
That's right.
We are in the Petite Champagne soil, and it was mostly my grandparents who actually developed the cognac business. My grandfather unfortunately died relatively young, and so my grandmother was left to deal with the family business for a long time. And at some point there was like the tragedy, like was what's going to happen with the business, who's going to take over. And so we sort of jumped a generation because my parents were quite present but not totally taking over, and my brother decided to take over in 2007, and we decided to join and come in 2009.
Yep. So to give a little more detail to that, as Therese mentioned, we're in the Petite Champagne. It's a family business, family owned and operated for a long time. The primary activity that we have is working the land and producing the spirit, and we only sell what we produce. We'll get into a little bit of the details of that down the road. But suffice to say for now that of what we produce, there are two channels for the sales. We have one channel, which is the wholesale market that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then that's the young spirit, and then the older spirit we put in the bottle under the family's proprietary brand. And as Therese pointed out, there was a little jump of the generation, and when we arrived in 2009 to give Samuel a hand and take responsibility for the bottles, we discovered a room full of treasure.
Cellar.
Yeah, because the kind of the short of it is that when Terry's grandmother took over the business when her husband passed away, she ended up turning increasingly to the wholesale market to get all of the working capital to keep the business running. And turns out the wholesale market only wants young spirit, and so everything that was getting old in 1990 just kept getting older. And we had the good fortune to find it when we showed up in 2009.
Well, we got married in 2009 at the property.
At the property.
We were traveling and living the vida loca. And my brother, who had taken over the company 2 years before, he just said, listen, I just want to sell to like a big brand, and I'm not interested in doing any sort of personalized or family brand. And he said, if you want to continue the family sort of branding and the family bottling, you need to come here, because I will be stopping that. And I'm like, oh, this might be a good point for us. We were living in Madrid at the time, and we sort of wanted to start our own business. And I said, hey, we already have business.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do.
So we decided. I was very sad to imagine that Bertrand's cognac was going to fade out in sort of the family's identity, the bottle, the labels, because I was doing that when I was a kid. That was my whole childhood, like coming in the summers and labeling by hand and all of that. That was sort of my childhood. So I was sort of feeling a little bit sad about it. And we said, well, maybe we'll give it a try. And 10 years, it's been 10 years since we've been here. And it's been a lot of hard work, because there was the family brand sort of almost disappeared locally and nationally. And so it took us a long time to sort of say, hey, we are here, we've got a lot of treasures, we welcome visitors, we have a boutique, we try to do, sort of œnotourisme, like try to give people experiences on site. And we've been having a lot of fun since then.
So how big an operation is Bertrand? What's your output? How big is the land there?
Sure. So in total, we have about 85 hectare of land that's under vine. That comes out to, I think, roughly 200 acre. It's about 2.5 acres to a hectare. And those vines are concentrated in two large plots we have here. One is called the Domaine des Buissons, and the other one is called the Domaine des Lages. And that combined domain is literally the marriage of the grandparents of Therese. So the Domaine des Buissons, with all the vines around the domain, the house, which is called Les Buissons, where we have our office and our chai. This comes from Simone, the grandmother, and then where we live here, we're sitting in our house, is the Domaine des Lages, and that's approximately the other half that comes from the grandfather's side, and this is also where we have our windmill up on the hill, which is the trademark of the family.
It's dark right now, otherwise I
dark
would
right
take
now,
the
yeah.
computer.
Otherwise we could take a look. And our total volume output, we wrote that down.
Let me interrupt for a second. Is there a
Sure.
difference between those two domains in either the type of grapes or the way that they grow in between the Brisson and the Lage?
So they're situated a bit differently, because the Domaine de Lage, which is where our windmill is on a sort of ridge.
It's on a really high ridge.
Really high ridge with limestone. So it actually is quite different to the Domaine des Brissons, which is a bit lower in altitude, which is quite fun, because even though the grape varieties are the same, we sort of have the maturity of the grape is obviously going to be different, and the amount of sugar also, because of the altitude difference. So that's sort of fun to then play with.
Do you always blend the grapes from the different domains into your eau de vie, or do you sometimes use just one?
Sure. So when we're harvesting, the order that the harvest comes in is dictated by how far along each parcel is in terms of hitting the sweet spot for the maturity. So it's not like we do all of one domain and then do all of the other domain to bring it in, and it's done
Per parcel.
by parcel according to when it's ready, and it's just kind of as it comes in, we end up combining the parcels as we are pushing through the process. We have some thoughts to break out maybe some unique parcels to see what happens as it ages, but that's going to be some years down the road, because it takes quite a long time for it to hit that maturity.
And I know you grow Uni Blanc. Do you grow other varietals as well?
Sure. So our white grapes are predominantly Uni Blanc. We have a few hectare of Colombard. The Colombard adds a little bit of extra sweetness and a little bit of extra complexity.
Yeah.
But our eau de vie is largely Uni Blanc. And when we make our white Pinot, the Colombard goes a lot into the white Pinot because it's a little bit sweeter, with some of the Uni Blanc to give it the acidity. And then we have some parcels as well of red grapes of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. That's to make the red Pinot.
Yeah, so that's like four grapes so total.
4 grapes total out of the.
But the vast majority is white.
Yeah, the vast majority is white and Uni Blanc.
And how much brandy are you making per year?
A lot.
This year was an exceptionally good year. So we have like around, in terms of, I think it's easier for people to understand when we talk about wine liters, and it's about 1,400,000 liters, more or less. 1,400,000, tu vois, 1,400,000.
I have to write that down. Duden hecto.
Yeah, that's liters of wine. So 1,400,000. So that's 1,400,000 liters of wine to distill.
1,400,000 liters of wine to pass, and that'll reduce roughly by a factor of 10.
Yeah,
so we're pushing about 150,000 liters of spirit each year now.
Well, this is actually quite new because when we arrived, or when my brother arrived, the vines were relatively old. You know, we have some parcels which are around 50, 60 years old. So now we have had to replant a lot because obviously a lot of the parcels were extremely tired. So we usually try to do some sort of turnover. We let the land rest, you know, for a year or two, and then we replant. So all the 12 years work is sort of
replanting, yeah,
now coming into a result.
Yeah, last year was short. The year before was a little bit short. There was some.
This was the first year, really.
Everybody had issues with frost for the last couple of years,
Yeah.
but across the whole region, we've heard from everybody that we know this has been a particularly good harvest for
everyone,
for
yeah.
the AOC of Cognac. At least this has been a particularly good year.
And of course, you know, you need volume because everything gets reduced as you move from the wine to the distillation, and then
Right.
the aging, it evaporates with the angel's share. So you need to start with a lot to get a little bit.
That's right.
And when is in the fall is your harvest usually?
And September, beginning of October, it depends on the years because we've had really hot summers. But last year it was like mid-September.
Yeah. Again, it usually falls, you know, like as Therese said, between middle of September, beginning of October. But again, it's the point at which the grape has hit its maturity that we start the harvest. So it's less according to the calendar, and it's more decided by the point at which the grape has reached its go time.
Mm-hmm.
And so for something like the Heritage, which I think some people are familiar with, like what grape varietals go into that, Brandy?
That was Uni Blanc and Colombard, both.
What do you do with the Merlot and the Cabernet and the Pinot?
So that's to make the red Pinot.
Yeah, it's exclusive for the red Pinot. It's just a few hectare, and rule number one of Cognac is only white grapes.
Right. So you're making wine with those.
So we don't actually produce wine on site. Our red grapes are exclusively to make our red Pinot.
So Pinot de Charente is a blend of grape juice and a young eau de vie.
Pinot de Charente. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I should have.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Sorry, it's like around here everybody says Pinot.
That's true, and we
think
forget.
Pinot de Charente.
Right,
Sorry
right.
about that. Pinot de Charente.
That's all right. No, and we have some big Pinot de Charente fans. So
Apologies for the confusion.
Oh, cool.
you can look for that. So you don't make the wine on premises for your Uni and Colombard either?
Oh, yes, we do. We do
Okay.
everything on site.
We do. If you like, we can run through that real quick.
That'd be great.
Okay, well, let's do that. So we'll start with the land. In the wintertime, the vines are sleeping. This is when we take advantage to prune the vines. They have to be pruned back every year. It gets them to the right shape.
Yeah.
In the spring, then those vines are going to grow. The new growth has to be guided so that it grows nice in straight lines like we want. And then the grapes are going to ripen over the summertime. And once those grapes are ready for the harvest, we're going to bring them in. For us, the target ideally is big, fat, juicy grapes with between 9 and 10% sugar content in the juice. Because our target for the wine is 9-ish percent.
Yeah, 9 is good.
Alcohol in the wine. That's kind of the sweet spot for where you want to start to have a good result with the distillation process. So once the grapes hit that point, we're gonna harvest. We do harvest by machine. Pretty much everybody in the region uses machines for the harvesting. This is because as soon as those grapes are ready, we want to bring them in as quickly as possible. And for us, the objective is maximum throughput and as basically as quickly as we can do it, because we want to press the grapes and get them changed into wine without a lot of oxidation happening with the contact with the air. There are a lot of soft aromas and things that we want to capture, and the longer that liquid sits exposed to the air, the more it's going to escape. And because we're going through all of the distillation and the aging process and everything else, this is not a wine to be put in a bottle and served with a meal. It has a very different destination. And so for that reason, the wine itself and the winemaking process might not look the same as what a traditional, say, winemaker for a table wine would do. So once we got those grapes pressed, we're gonna do the fermentation in steel tanks, giant steel tanks. Each one is 500 hectoliters, so 50,000 liters in each one. And it takes approximately 7 days from beginning to end. And when we're finished, we should have a white wine, which is cloudy, very dry, very high acidity, and zero sugars left. We want to have a wine which has ideally had all the sugar changed into alcohol. This is in part for the distillation process, and also because it helps to preserve the wine over the course of the distillation season.
Mm-hmm.
So once we get there, we're ready for the distillation. As we mentioned, our big rule number one, when we're doing visits, we talk about our 3 big rules of cognac, because there are a lot of details, but it makes it easier if you just boil it down to 3. So first big rule is only white grapes. We talked about that. Uni Blanc Colombard for us. Big rule number 2 is that all the distillation is done in pot stills, batch distillation. It's not a continuous process like one might find with Armagnac, for example, in a column still. Here it is always a pot still. For anyone who's not familiar with the construction of a pot still, it looks like a giant pot with a top on it.
Marmite.
The 3 big pieces are the boiler, which we call a chaudière in French. This is where we heat the liquid and causes the liquid to change into a vapor. The whole secret here, everybody's going to know the secret now, is that alcohol has a lower boiling temperature than water. So we bring up the temperature, the alcohol turns into a vapor first, the water in large part stays behind in the boiler, that alcohol goes up. It's going to pass through some tubes to get to the condensing unit. We call that a serpentin. It's going to cool off the vapor and it's going to come out as a liquid. And that's the end of the cycle, with a lot of in-between details taken out. The third big piece that you would see in a typical Charente still is called the wine heater, or the réchauffe-vin. We keep our wine outdoors in the wintertime, so it's very cold during distillation season. So each batch of wine is going to be brought in and it's going to be preheated with the heat, like you can imagine it's like the waste heat of the process. Instead of just losing the heat, we use that heat to preheat the cold wine. So it's a passive heat exchange. It doesn't affect the process, but it saves a tremendous amount of energy.
And we heat the house.
And we heat the house. And we heat the house with it. So each batch takes about 12 hours. So we do a day cycle and a night cycle. And then big rule number 3 is that it's a double distillation process. Our first cycle, we call it the chauffe du vin, or the heating of the wine. It goes in at 10%. Comes out at about this result of the first.
You broke up for a minute there. Can you repeat it? It goes in at 10% and then.
Sorry. So we fill the boiler with our distillation wine for the chauffe du vin. This is going to be about 10% alcohol. It's going to go through its passage of the still, and the output of our first cycle is called brouillis. It's a very hard word to pronounce for an American. It took me about 5 years to do that, but I do okay now. Brouillis. And that's going to come out around 30% alcohol. We're going to collect that brouillis in a steel tank as it's produced, and we're going to wait for a subsequent cycle to take that brouillis and put it back into the boiler. The second cycle is called the bon chauffe, or the good heat. We're going to start at about 30% alcohol, and the result of the second cycle we call eau de vie, or water of life, just like you would call it for whiskey. And it's going to come out at about 70% alcohol. It's going to be crystal clear, and this is the final result of the distillation process. We're going to send that then to the barrels immediately to start the aging process.
And I want to add, there are some great pictures you sent of your stills on the post I put up scheduling this interview.
great.
So if people want to see the stills, they're up there. How old are those? Those stills that you're using? How
So
long-
we've added a third one actually. So some of the people that know us have visited our distillery and have only known two, and up until last year we added a third one. So the last two were from the 70s. I still have my grandfather in pictures with these stills, and the third one was just recently added. But the interesting thing is the Héritage cognac, which some of you now know and have tasted, was distilled in very small ones that we don't have anymore. There were like 7, 8 hectoliters.
Hectoliters.
Yeah, 7, 8, and we don't have those anymore. And that's why it's also cool to sort of think of the past and the evolution. But we have 3 stills now.
Do you find the different stills have produced spirit of different character of your 3 stills?
Not particularly. I would say it would be a very hard thing to measure.
Yeah.
Of course, if you compare the very small one to this bigger one, of course you'd have a difference. But the 3 that we have the same sort of measure, so
Yeah,
500
I mean, the result is more or less the same. Each still has its own, character. All of these, even today, like they're still largely made by hand, fitted by hand. So each one is its own creature.
Although the third one we're just distilling now, so we don't know yet. We may see, as you say, we may see some differences. So we're gonna see that later. But
you do when one is working in the distillery, one will notice a different smell coming from the eau de vie, depending on which batch of wine is going through also. So that plays a part. I would suggest that I would say, yes, there's probably some subtle difference between each of the stills. You would have to really spend a lot of time, I think, to find it. The larger difference would be from the different lots of wine. You really notice the difference there.
And so you've got your 70% ABV distillate.
Correct.
Do you reduce it before it goes into the barrels?
We do not.
So you put it directly into the barrel, and what kind of barrel does it go into initially? Or
right. So every day when we do our bon chauffe, we are going to measure the alcohol, log it in a ledger so that the tax man gets his piece. And then immediately after that, we send it directly to one of our chais, which is called Chais La Cour. It's the oldest chais that we have.
So La Cour, sorry, can I just explain? Chais de la Cour means it's like the inside courtyard of the house. It's like the oldest.
It's the one which is the closest to the house. And the first place that the new spirit is deposited is in giant barrels, which are called tonneaux. They're larger than your standard size barrel, and these tonneaux in particular were used by the great grandfather of Therese. They're more than 100 years old, and that's the first wood that the spirit touches. It's going to wait there for its turn then to start cycling through the barrels. The smaller barrels, your standard size 400-liter barrel. For cognac, it's always going to be oak. Traditionally, it's going to be French oak. Curiously, that's like the one thing which is not actually a rule in cognac. Cognac has a million rules, but
we have a lot
French
of rules.
oak is one of them, but French oak is just a strongly held guideline, which is why nowadays you can find cognacs that have been finished in whiskey barrels or finished in Sauternes barrels or finished. There are people who are trying new things because one producer several years ago decided to sit down and actually read all of those rules and discovered that French oak was not actually codified, and started experimenting. But I think it's really interesting to see what's happening there. But that tangent aside, we do our first stage always in new barrels. So the clear spirit is always going to go into what we call a new barrel. For aging in general, what we need is contact with the wood and contact with the air. Wood being a porous material allows the air to connect with the liquid inside the barrel. A new barrel is going to focus primarily on giving that character of the wood. So everything the wood can give in terms of color, flavor, aroma, tannin, everything that the wood can give, the new barrel gives it the most. It goes in clear, it comes out colored. Everybody's rhythm is a little bit different. For us, it's typically going to be about 12 months in a new barrel.
Are you using Limousine oak, or where's your oak? Where do your barrels come?
Limousin, yes.
It's largely Limousin oak, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so once it comes out of the new barrel, we are going to consolidate the lots that are earmarked for the wholesale market. And we're going to take the lots that are going to stay with us and the lots that we want for a little bit more work with the barrel before it's ready to go out for wholesale. We're going to put those into an intermediate stage, which is our stage 2. In English, we would call it a red barrel. In French, they call it a fût roux.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, drink some more.
So we actually have had some few years where we've sort of played a little bit with some barrels. So because we have several fournisseurs, providers of barrels, so we put the same eau de vie into like different providers' barrels, and we've actually looked at the color, we tasted, and it's amazing the amount of differences that you can find.
Yeah.
Having them put in the same cellar in sort of the same corner with the same amount of humidity, etc. It's actually quite interesting to see the evolution of that. Mm-hmm. And that actually guides us to which provider we want to work with.
Yeah. So the
roux barrels, yeah.
The fût roux, R-O-U-X, if I got that spelling right.
Oui.
Okay. Call it a red barrel. The red barrel is going to be generally at least 3 years old for us. Why 3 years old? Because a new barrel is good for 3 times for us. After that, it doesn't give what it needs, and it's either going to become a red barrel and stay with us, or we're going to cycle it out for a new barrel. So once the product goes into a red barrel, because the aggressive notes of the wood have been used up by the previous cycles, it can stay in a red barrel basically for all the time that we want, because the barrel is also getting older, and each year the effect of the wood itself is going to become progressively softer. If we have the product for a really long time, we could say 15 years or so, we're going to start looking for space in an old barrel. We have a lot of old barrels. These are barrels that are so old that the effect of the wood itself is basically gone. It's extremely soft of the wood, but these barrels will hold the cognac. It will treat it very softly. Kind of a rule of thumb that we like to think about is that as the product gets older, we want for the effect of the wood to be progressively softer. But we want the other piece of the puzzle to always continue working, and that's the contact with the air, the famous angel share that you hear talk of. And this is absolutely essential. Talk to people about it. We say, well, we lose between 2 and 4% of everything every year to evaporation. People say, oh my God, that's so much. You should try and stop it. But the reality is that the loss is absolutely essential, because the part that evaporates tends to be the most aggressive nature of the alcohol. And without that loss, the product will never become nicely rounded and balanced. There's no other way to make that aggressive character go. So once it's in the old barrels, it's just going to keep working slowly. The contact with the air is going to soften it, round it. And also there's some oxidation going on. Again, the oxygen is going to produce some more complexity over time.
Mm-hmm. And as it ages, as you're switching from barrel to barrel, is it just the contents of one barrel going to another, or are you combining several barrels to go into the next stage barrel?
It depends.
It depends.
Of course, if we see that like for example, two cognacs have very, very similar flavors and have aged sort of exactly in almost the same place and have the same age, we may put them together because otherwise we're sort of wasting space. And you have to imagine that one sort of barrel, which is 400 liters, is nowadays it's almost 900 euros. So it requires quite a large, for the barrel, you know, only it requires quite a large sort of economic, you know, investment. Yeah. So sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, because if we really taste the cognac and we feel that it has something special, we really don't want to mix it with anything else.
Yeah. The objective is to keep the lots separate because each one does have its unique character. But sometimes just because of the limitations of physical space, we have to sometimes consolidate things. Because, for example, if you have a barrel of cognac that is working with the angel share and it's losing 2 to 4% of its volume every year, and you start compounding that, then you end up after a certain period of time with, so you have a lot of 10 barrels, all of those 10 barrels are partial such that you actually have 9 barrels worth of liquid in the 10 barrels. So you would, so a common thing to do, for example, would be to consolidate that lot of 10 barrels, even though each one is technically a unique barrel. One is constrained by the physical storage capacity. So we'll take those 10 barrels, consolidate them in a tonneau, and then put them back into 9 of the original 10 barrels. And then we've liberated another barrel that we can put a different cognac in and start that clock on.
Now, the interesting thing is that each barrel has a mémoire, like a memory. So sometimes we've had, like, we did a bottling and of a really good cognac, and we take it out from that barrel and we put something interesting inside, and it sort of gets imprégné, like
it like
gets
imprints
of whatever was inside, and that's really, really cool. That's a really interesting thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your aging facility like? Where do the barrels sit? Are they moved around? How do you deal with that?
Okay, let's see. So we have several different buildings where we do the aging. The two kind of principal ones we have in a standalone building. One of the rooms is almost exclusively new barrels. And then the other larger room is it's probably about a third new barrels, and then the rest of it is old barrels. The reason for I guess old and intermediate age barrels, but mostly old there. The reason is that the new spirit, we need a lot more barrels to always be turning those through. So with the young spirit, there is a constant turnover of barrels. So I don't know if you all have seen pictures, but you have the barrels racked out 3 and 4 high, and what'll happen is we'll rack out, 30 some odd barrels, 40 some odd barrels in those racks, and we'll use them. And then when it's time to cycle them out, we're going to empty all of them and then take them out one by one physically, and then stack up new ones again. The old ones just stay in their place, and we just use long hoses and very narrow little metal tubes to stick down inside to fill them and empty them as needs to be.
Yeah, but we have it sort of separated. Like we have 3 different cellars, and for those who come and visit the property, there's like the one cellar which we talked before, which is Chai de la Cour, and it's sort of inside the courtyard of the house. Oh. And then we have another one which is really sort of overlooking almost the vines at the back.
Yeah.
And then we have the other one which has mostly just new barrels for the wholesale market.
Right. So we don't physically move barrels around. It's more placing the barrels empty and then using pumps and hoses to transfer the liquid from one barrel to another or from one building to another. So there's, as Terry said, we have, you know, the building Chez La Cour, which its primary purpose is to receive the newly produced spirit. And we take advantage of some space on the floor to do some aging. We have one which is primarily for consolidating large lots of cognac for our wholesale business. We have one where we do the blends for the blends in preparation for our bottles. And then we have the two that have a lot of barrels. One is to really focus on getting that first cycle for the young spirit. And then the other is for holding the old spirit and letting it do its thing.
Hopefully you can come and visit
Yeah.
after this whole COVID thing.
I would love to.
Yeah.
So okay, so you've got your aged spirit, it's ready to go.
Mhm.
What's your next step in getting it from barrel to bottle?
In getting it from barrel to bottle. So we have some kind of like target age ranges where we can set kind of like bookends on the age of the product that we're going to go look for in the Chez to replace one of the bottles in our range. I'm gonna make a distinction here between the bottles in our like standard range and then the special bottlings that we've done, like the Heritage or the Ye Old School bottles that we did, the BDF2 and things like that.
And
So
your standard range is right. You have a VS. Do you have a VS, a VSOP, and an XO? Is that the
we do
range?
VS, VSOP, Napoleon, and XO.
We have XO with this same sort of look. We have VS, VSOP, Napoleon, and XO.
Right. So the ages for each one of these will be roughly 5 years for the VS, 10 years for the VSOP, 20 for the Napoleon, and between 30 and 35 for the XO. And what we do is we take a look at what we have in the Chez, because everything has to come from our Chez, and we look for what we have that will respect that age range, and then also
The identity.
the kind of the experience of tasting the product, whether it's the VS or the VSOP or the Napoleon or the XO. And because each lot that goes into one of these bottles might have a slightly different aroma or slightly different flavor because it came from a different year, we try to focus really hard on the experience that you might have. How hot is the alcohol on the front, for example, for a VS? Is it nicely rounded? For something like our Napoleon, which is for us right where we have the first roundness of maturity. Does it display that nice round and balanced character? Are we seeing an increasing intensity and longer finish as the product gets older? That's kind of the way we think about it, instead of saying, oh, this needs to be, more peach on the nose.
We like to talk about
we're
experiencing the cognac itself.
It's also because we feel like the tasting experience, it's a really subjective experience. So when we're preparing our bottles for the core range, we try to think a lot about the objective experience that somebody is going to have. Because if you get into the subjective stuff, so if we're both tasting the same cognac, you might say peach and I might say apricot, but we both agree that there's fruit, for example.
And do you reduce with water before bottling?
Yes.
For all of your bottles?
No, actually, that would be the difference between the core gam and these exclusive bottlings that actually Ceres Brandy mostly have had. I mean, the people that I've seen doing the posts on the Ceres Brandy have had only exclusive bottlings. So they would have had, for example, the Heritage has no reduction, no filtering. It's like a cask strength. Is that how you call it? Yeah, cask strength. So that's that would be like an exclusive sort of. Yeah,
the dividing line there would be between what we define as our core range and then the cask strength bottlings. So the core range will be brought down very softly with water, so that we don't unbalance the character of the product. The exclusive bottlings that we've done here with the cask strength, those don't receive any water.
We have done some tests actually
We've
with
done
the,
some tests.
with the heritage before we put it on a bottle. And to just give a quick story of it, it was it was a friend, Norwegian, who came, and he was absolutely passionate about cognacs. And we went to the cellar and we had different tasting with at least 10 or 11 different barrels.
Mm-hmm.
And he just tasted the heritage and he said, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And so we sort of took that and we reduced it at several degrees. And we kept reducing it and thinking, this is not it. This is not it. And at some point we said, actually it doesn't need anything. It's just amazing as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of how we started doing these exclusive bottlings. And we're having quite a lot of fun with this.
But that was a curiosity, the effect of the water, because as Therese said, the cask strength is around 49. And before we made the final decision, I did some tests where
we spent
we
a
had
long
it at
time.
49. I brought it down to 47, one at 45 and one at 43. And the effect of the water, more than anything, it made the mouth feel really heavy. Something which I find particularly interesting about the heritage is that it has tremendous intensity and tremendous character and aroma and length and everything that you want in a good cognac. But it also has this silky, velvety mouthfeel. It's super light on the palate. And I've never really found any other that has quite that same experience. And reducing it with water, even just 2 percentage points ABV, made it heavy on the tongue.
Now, it works sometimes though for other cognacs. Other cognacs may need to have a reduction, and it actually is better, but it wasn't on this
No,
case.
this one was ready.
So what's the difference between the heritage and the standard lineup you make? Are there different ages in it? How does it differ?
Right. So the heritage and the other BDF1, BDF2 that we did, those are single lot cask strength. Whereas our VSOP, Napoleon XO, those are typically going to be, it's rarely going to be just one. It's typically going to be a blend of 2, occasionally 3 eau de vies to find the consistent character that we want to present in that core range. We're looking for a little bit more consistency with that. So we're going to put together 2, sometimes 3 different cognacs to achieve the final result.
And when you say single lot versus 2 to 3, what does that mean? Is that barrel or cognac?
Right. So when I say single lot, that would be, let's see, for the heritage, that would be a lot of barrels that we consolidated to do the bottling. For the BDF1, for everyone from Serious Brandy who got the BDF1 last year, that one was a lot of 4 barrels. And this BDF2 came from just 1 barrel.
And those are bottlings you did with the Legacy Brandy group, is that right?
That's correct.
So people know.
That's correct.
And so for like the heritage, like how old is the brandy in the heritage typically?
It's really old.
Really old.
I tried to get more information from my grandmother. So we know that it's at least 50, but according to my grandmother, it's 60 plus. So it's sort of hard. We started promoting it as 50 plus because we couldn't really, we wanted to be fair, but we know it's 60 plus. Because it comes, according to my grandmother's records, it's at least 60. So it's good for the consumer.
Yeah, I had a very fun detective search through all of the old old records and all of the old books talking
Well,
about
my grandparents only
movements
had
and-
like these old
Yeah.
notebooks, and they were like
I know it's very old school.
hard to read
Yeah.
because my grandmother and my grandfather
Yeah.
didn't necessarily have the best handwriting. But it's
Yeah.
how they did it in the old days.
It was a fun search. It was a fun search going back through the records. So as far as I could get it fixed on the records was definitely at least 50 years old.
Yeah.
And that oldest record that I found of it said it's already old, but
So
it didn't say
means
by how much.
10 plus at least on whatever you found. So
Yeah.
And are those all still in barrels? Do you move things to glass ever, or did they stay in there?
no,
until they're ready?
we have our treasure sort of cellar there, and right now we only did the Heritage, we did the BDF1 and BDF2.
Mm-hmm.
We've done a private bottling for Japan, and that's it. So
Yeah.
we still have a lot of things. This is like one of our strengths that we didn't realize it was a strength when we arrived. It's that it's actually very hard to find very, very old cognac. And because my grandmother stopped selling bottles, or she did really, really small amounts just to please a few friends and old customers, she continued aging these cognacs and never did anything with it. So of course we arrived in 2009, and so we start doing our core gam. So 5 years for the VS, approximately 10 for the VSOP, 20 for the Napoleon, 35 for the XO. And we realized that we have barrels which are like 35, 40, 45, 50, 60. And we're like, wow, this is really good. But at the
very
moment, we didn't have the public or the profile of client that would actually appreciate something that would be just straight from a barrel into a
Yeah.
bottle. So it took us a couple of years to understand that and see what the profile of client would be, and we're very happy that we did now with these different lots.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first release the Heritage?
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
And how much do you have left of this really old brandy?
Counting bottles, I don't know. We might have 100.
In the bottles, we have.
We didn't do any promotion. We
Yeah.
didn't sort of. We wanted it to
Still-
go slow, to people to discover it, people to enjoy. It wasn't like, because we're everything that has to do with the branding, with the work, with the bottles, it's just literally Seth and me. That's
Yeah.
it. So Samuel, my brother, works with a team of 5-6 people, but there's only 2 of us for the
Yeah.
sort of the branding and the selling. So we haven't really promoted much.
No, I
let's-
actually meant in the casks. Like, how much old brandy
Yeah.
do you still have? To
Right.
work with?
Oh, sorry.
So of the Heritage, we have between 150 and 200 bottles left in the bottle,
Mhm.
and then
We have other cognacs.
and then we
aging.
have other cognacs, and we have another part of that Heritage that
We left continuing.
we left in the barrels that we will quite likely do a second bottling once the first one is done, and we'll see how it's evolved in the intervening time.
And then is that it, or do you have other casks down there?
We have other
50, 60,
casks.
We have many others.
Yeah, we have other casks. We started with the Heritage, and it was very well received.
It was like a test run also.
So we started thinking about other of the cask strength ones that we could put forward. We've been doing it right now, bouncing the ideas off other people. We collaborated with Ryan just to do the couple of exclusive bottlings.
That was fun.
So we had a little bit of back and forth with them to see what they prefer, because again, it's
with who
subjective.
you broke up for a minute there too. Who did you collaborate with?
With Ryan and Justin from
Legacy Brandy.
Yeah.
Legacy Brandy, yeah. So that's something that we did too. We bounce ideas off each other because again, it's subjective. Some people have ones that they like or ones that they don't, and so it's helpful also to get the feedback from the people who are searching for something like this.
Also with different backgrounds.
yeah.
I find that really interesting.
So we have different lots that we're looking at. We don't fear. We do have a second round of Heritage that we can put out in the meantime.
I know our folks will be happy to hear that.
We have, I mean, between the Heritage and our BDF1 and the BDF2, we have 3 that we've found that definitely resonate, and we're peeking around to see what else to see what else is ready to come out to the light.
To be
Now,
shared, to be shared.
Yeah, to be shared.
on your standard lineup, you mentioned you add water. Do you add any other of the permissible additives? Boisé, sugar, caramel, any of that?
Sure. So we don't work with much of that at all. Caramel, not at all. With the sugar and with the boisé, the way that we think about it is that, well, I'll talk real broadly about what these different things do. Just to give you all an idea. That might be interesting.
Who might not know how they affect
right.
the
So
cognac.
we'll do a quick overview. So there are four additives that are defined as allowable in the rules of cognac. Those are sugar, caramel color, boisé, water. The water is going to be pure distilled water. We use that to reduce the degree of alcohol. This is a pretty essential ingredient, because cognac is typically going to be, between 40 and 45 ABV, and to get it down to that ABV in a reasonable number of years, you absolutely have to put water in. There are some new systems that are pretty cool. Some people do it 1 drop at a time, because you need the water to incorporate well before the product regains its balance. It's like you put the water in, puts everything out of balance, and you have to give it time for it to come back. So water is essential. Caramel, in our opinion, serves little to no purpose. It has really no effect on flavor. It's purely cosmetic.
It's just for the color.
It's for the color. And if you put too much, it turns the cognac orange.
Very orangey, yeah.
Pay attention. If you have a cognac that is a very deep orange hue, there's a pretty good chance that somebody was a little heavy-handed with the caramel color. So the boisé is an oak wood essence. It's like concentrated oak wood essence. This is going to add depth of wood and wood aromas. Typically, it's going to be cut with an eau de vie and left to age for a little while to let it incorporate before one might use it. The effect of the aroma, as I said, it'll give some depth and some wood
hints, yeah.
Wood hints, wood flavors, wood aromas. But it can overpower really quickly any kind of subtler and more interesting aromas. So if someone is heavy-handed with the boisé, it's going to taste like wood and nothing else.
It's going to cover,
it's going to cover everything that's interesting. And the effect is going to turn it really dark brown. And then the last one is sugar. Typically, it's going to be pure cane syrup from sugarcane, pure syrup from sugarcane. What this will do, it'll add sweetness to the product, and it also will soften the aggressive notes of the alcohol, the fiery notes. What you have to pay in exchange is that it will destroy the finish of your cognac. If you taste a cognac that has a finish that goes out and then drops off a cliff immediately, that might be sugar. It also changes the apparent degree alcohol, so you're limited. If you put too much, you're not allowed to call it cognac anymore. It's what's called obscuration, if you've ever heard anybody talk about that. So I think that if one's objective is to push volume and consistency of what goes into the bottle, then these additives serve to make things more homogeneous, because each lot is different. For a small producer like us, the sugar and boisé can be appropriate if used judiciously in a younger cognac.
Like in a VS.
Like in a VS, because a VS is a young spirit. It's still very aggressive, relatively speaking, and it hasn't had time to really develop a lot of a finish either. And a VS also is typically going to be mixed with something else. If it's old enough, it's good for sipping.
It's for a
but,
cocktail.
But it usually the application is for a cocktail or something. Most cocktails usually get some simple syrup in it anyway. So what the sugar would do for the VS is to just round off a little bit the aggressive note. And the boisé could give it a little bit of depth of wood that might benefit the product.
It has to be well measured though.
It has to be, you have to be really careful with it because it can go too far really fast. So I think that if it's used judiciously and wisely in a younger cognac, it can achieve a more pleasurable experience for the person who's tasting it. But if you need to use sugar and boisé in an older cognac,
it's
10 years old and up, it's because you did something wrong.
Yeah, well, it hasn't aged well. Basically.
It's like you haven't aged it well. If you need to use sugar and boisé, in my opinion, if you need to use sugar and boisé in an older cognac, you've had a problem with your aging process because once it's old enough to have developed all of this character, if you add something like that, you're just going to cover it up.
It doesn't need it. I mean, if it's well aged.
Yeah, if you need it in an older cognac, you probably messed up.
So do you exclusively use sugar and boisé in the VS, or have you had times where you've had to add it to other cognacs?
It's only when we find that
it's lacking, the VS is lacking.
Yeah, like if the VS is lacking just a little bit of depth, one would do like 0.1% by volume, or like if it's just a little bit too aggressive on the alcohol, again, like 0.1% by volume.
But only on the VS, because our VSOP is extremely interesting. It's very fruity.
Yeah.
And it actually is very good as it is.
So
we don't need, as from the VSOP, we usually don't put anything.
Right. So like to put it in round numbers times 0.001. This would be like putting 1 liter into 1,000 liters.
It's a very small amount.
It's a very small amount.
So,
but it's important to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation to have because you have a very purist viewpoint at one extreme, and then you have a very practical viewpoint at the other extreme when you're a much larger brand and your objective is to push it hard.
So speaking of larger brands,
yes.
One thing you mentioned earlier is that a certain amount of the brand you make is wholesale, that you sell as wholesale. And so what is your relationship then with the big, who do you work with, and what's your relationship with the big brands of cognac?
So we work with Hennessy.
Hennessy's our partner.
We've worked with Hennessy, gosh, since I remember as a kid.
Long time.
And we've always had a very good relationship with them. We literally just age the cognac 1-2 years, and then they come and they take a big amount of what we produce. So that would be the area that my brother deals with and his team. And we deal with everything else that is aged in the cellar.
And what percentage of the cognac you make is wholesale versus the cognac you make for your own bottlings?
Sure.
85 versus for us would be the rest. So 85 is wholesale, because we have very small bottlings. Like we do small volumes on a bottle.
So typically how it would work is that we have a contract agreement by which we'll supply between 85 and 90% of our annual production will go to wholesale under contract, and that'll go out staged over the course of 3 years. So, if you imagine you know, one third of the production. You know, first third goes out first year, second third goes out second year, third goes out third year. And it's a pretty standard way that it's done. Sometimes it's under contract, sometimes it's under long-standing agreement. It just kind of depends on who you're working with and how long you've been working with them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the world of cognac, I've heard other people in cognac talk about this, that's so dominated by these big houses. Where do you see yourselves in terms of your independent bottlings? Like what is your market?
Okay.
Who are you talking to, and how do you create a presence when the market is so dominated by these big companies?
Okay.
I think we'll both want to talk.
Sure. Well, I'll speak to that real quick. I'll kind of make the outline for you. I wrote down some numbers, so I'll give you the big numbers here. So according to the Bureau National of Cognac, the BNIC, here in our region, there are about 60,000 people that live from the economy of cognac.
Which is a lot.
Cognac is literally one of the economic engines
Yeah.
of this part of France. I looked it up on the Wikipedia. Between Charente and Charente-Maritime, there are about 1 million people, and 60,000 of those work directly in cognac. And then there are tens of thousands in ancillary jobs. You know, your people who work on tractors, fix the tractors. We have your mechanics. You have your
Printers, bottlers.
printers, bottlers. You know, people who make
corks,
corks,
yeah.
people who make everything. So we have 60,000 people that work directly in cognac. Then there are about 4,300 small companies that are called viticulteurs. Those are the producers. So we're viticulteurs. We're one of those 4,300. Those viticulteurs have their vines, they produce the product, distill it, and then most of them will send it on to the wholesale market 100%. The other type of structure that we have here in cognac is called a négociant. That roughly translates as a broker. We have something like 280, rounded off, 280 négociants in the region. Of those 280, the largest one is Hennessy. And the next three are Rémy Martin, Martel, and Courvoisier. And between those four, we understand that represents something like 90% of the global market for bottles.
Mm-hmm.
Hennessy by itself is over half. So what that means for us as a producer is that literally all of the viticulture in the region, literally nearly every single viticulture in the region is going to be working to greater or lesser degree with one of these large houses for wholesale. Everybody works with the wholesale market. It provides a lot of just the economic engine of the region and the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important. That's really important. It really brings a lot to the region for us. In terms of our relationship in the market, we feel like now, especially with you know, internet and the connection, the fact that we're doing this with you right now, you know, there's a much wider reach for people to find what
Smaller
they want.
producers.
And we would suggest that there's not just one market for cognac anymore. It's really kind of two markets. The people that would come to our front door to look for one of our bottles wouldn't necessarily be interested in going and buying one of the big house bottles. And people who really like the product that is made by these big houses, and there's some very good product that is made by these big houses, they know what they want and they know what they like, and they're not interested in what we have to offer. So I think there's room for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't sense any kind of hostility or bad blood,
No.
or it seems to be pretty.
That's our feeling.
That's my impression.
Also because there are different profiles of customers. You know, it's like
Certainly.
It's like the same when you can buy wine in a supermarket, or you can go to a wine shop. And if you want to be guided, then you're going to go to the wine shop. If you wanted to look for something very low priced, then you're going to go to the supermarket. Now, sometimes you can get both of the customers. You know, they could be interested in both. But but most of the times there are two profile of clients different. So I think we fit in the profile of a person who wants to discover something new, something with very small volumes, something done on site. They want to meet the person that has done it directly. You know, they want to see where we work, how we do it. They want to hear the history of the family, and all that is sort of, you know, transmitted through a visit. And those are the people looking for an experience. So the experience can be given on site, but it can be also given just tasting a cognac, you know, just sort of, you know, understanding what's the identity of the producer, how you got the product, and how old is has aged, and how it has aged, and etc. So I think, you know, we're pretty positive in that sense.
That's a great observation about it really being two separate markets, because it really does seem to be. So one thing a lot of people have asked, and I see some notes in the comments, I'm in Canada, I'm in Australia, I'm in the US, where can I buy Bertrand? And you're not in the US at retail right now, are you? Where are you available?
Okay.
That's our
sure.
big question for us too.
Sure. So let's see. Right now, one of our largest markets is France. Domestic sales in France.
Quite untypical for a cognac house, because most cognac houses do export. We have now started working with a shop in London called the Hedonism Wines. We have someone in Belgium, the cognac shop. We have Fine Rams, who have done an amazing job.
In Denmark.
We have Cognac Expert, who ships worldwide, and La Cognatek also. So there are places. So I'd say maybe depending where they are, maybe they can send us a message. I will send my email, and maybe I can guide them through what's the best way to get our cognacs. Hopefully one day we'll be in the States.
We'll get there. We'll get there. We're working on it.
It's because we do small volumes, it's hard to get to a big market. Like we feel that maybe they would be asking an amount that we can't provide, or, you know, maybe we would find someone who would be looking for small limited editions or something like that. So we need to still find, you know.
For France, if you live in France, we can send it direct in the mail, no problem. If it's outside of France,
we have
Europe-wide, we have different partners in different countries in Europe. Farther abroad, it would be one of those third-party partners that we have that can ship small packages worldwide. And then for other markets, for larger volumes or more regular presence in the market, because it's alcohol, there needs to be an import partner. And the United States is an especially special market with the famous three-tier system, with the importers and the distribution and the retail, and the COLA registration for the labels and everything else. The United States is a really complicated market for a small producer to get into, just by virtue of the size of the market and the structure of the market, because the supply side for cognac is very heavily consolidated in the retail market between those big four, and it's our understanding that the structure of distributorships in the United States, through which all alcohol must flow, is also very heavily consolidated among the top 5 or 10 distributorships. And the reality is that, and if I was the owner of one of those large distributors, I totally incentive you want to push volume. So there's a lot less incentive to engage with smaller producers, because as a distributor for the same amount of work, you can push a lot more. That's just the reality.
Yeah, we also have Holland. I forgot
Holland too. Yeah. But there are good specialty importers and specialty distributors in the United States that do great work. They work really hard.
One day we'll find a solution.
We'll get there.
In the meantime, there are other options.
There are other options in the meantime.
We can guide you through. Did you taste the héritage? What is that you got? The héritage?
I have the Heritage.
Oh yes,
I
you
have
put some notes. I remember.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's been very well received by almost everyone that I have seen.
Thank you. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone in Serious Brandy, because it's been really interesting to hear everyone's different comments. It's nice to
it's a lot of fun.
understand how they experience it.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of our folks when I say we'd love to see more and certainly see more on the shelves. Do you have any particular plans for new or different bottlings that you're thinking about? What's in the future for you all?
I think we have some few hints, because we sort of go to the cellar and Seth comes back with like 10 samples and I'm like, what are you doing? And Tommy, our older son, is like, Papa, it's like 9 in the morning. You haven't had a coffee yet.
It's quality control.
And it's like, I've just, he needs to do it in the morning where his palate is, sort of not influenced and clean. And so we have different options. It's just, it's complicated because we have actually a lot of old cognac.
Yeah.
And so it's complicated to decide what would be the next.
So
there are several potential candidates, I'll say it.
I agree for what's coming in the future, with our core range of those 4 bottles, the VS VSOP Napoleon XO, we want to always have that, with that same good consistent experience. And then for the future, we've really discovered a very interesting I guess market with these cask strength bottlings. There's a lot of interest, and it's really interesting to go through the discovery process and find these little treasures that people like a lot. And it's especially nice with these cask strength bottlings because we know that every single bottle that's going out is going to somebody that is really going to appreciate it. And that's a special bonus to it, because
it's also important for us, because we're thinking, my grandfather worked so hard for so many years and he died so young, and it's like, at least his work has not been done in vain, It's like somebody, obviously it's his work that we're putting into a bottle, it's he's how do you say, he's
his heritage.
His heritage, yeah. So it's nice to know that there are actually people out there that appreciate it and enjoy it. So that's like, my grandmother was really excited when we first did the bottling of the Heritage. She was like, it's like, at last, something is being done and something is being shared. And so it's quite exciting for the family.
That's great. Well, Therese and Seph, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank you for making great cognac for all of us to drink. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's been very exciting. Since we have curfew, this was our cognac date.
Yeah, this was our date. We got to go out tonight.
So thank you for letting us
provide that for you.
And we welcome you all to come and visit when possible. We'll be delighted to actually give you a taste of those old cognacs in the cellars.
Yeah, come see us.
I'm sure you'll have people who want to take you up on that. Well, have a great evening and thanks so much.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.